The constable had already been through the duffel bag twice. He had unzipped every pocket, run his hands along the seams, shaken out a folded flannel shirt onto the gravel shoulder of the highway. A protein bar wrapper drifted across the asphalt in the October wind. The man standing beside the truck watched it go and said nothing. His name was Darnell Ossie. He was 34 years old. He had driven 11 hours from Halifax, and he had 3 more to go before he reached his sister's house in Sault Ste. Marie, where his niece was turning 7 the next morning. The cake was in a box on the back seat. It had been a careful drive because of that. No sudden stops. Both hands on the wheel. He had been signaling for the lane change. He knew he had been signaling because he had checked his mirror. Counted to 3 the way his driving instructor told him to when he was 16 and then moved over. But Constable Thibault had said otherwise, and now it was 11:15 at night on a stretch of the Trans-Canada where the tree line was so dark it swallowed the sky. And Thibault's partner, a younger officer named Godet who had said almost nothing since they pulled over, was standing by the cruiser with his hands in his vest pockets, watching. "You said there's a safe," Thibault said. He wasn't asking. "There's a lockbox," Darnell said. "In the wheel well under the cargo mat. Same thing, not legally." Thibault stopped. He turned around from the truck bed and looked at Darnell the way men look at something they've already decided is a problem. He had that particular quality of stillness that isn't calm. It's the stillness of someone choosing which version of themselves to be. "You a lawyer now?" "No," Darnell said. "I'm a man standing on the side of the highway in the cold because you said I didn't signal, which I did." Godet shifted his weight by the cruiser. He didn't say anything. Thibault walked slowly around the open tailgate, past the shaken-out flannel shirt, and stopped 2 feet from Darnell. He was a large man, thick through the chest, with the kind of confidence that had never really been tested. You could tell by the way he moved. He moved like someone who had never once in his adult life been told he was wrong by someone he was required to listen to. "The dog gave an indication," Thibault said. The dog, a German shepherd named something Darnell hadn't caught, was back in the cruiser. It had not indicated anything. It had sniffed around the rear bumper for 30 seconds, sneezed, and been led back by Godet without ceremony. Darnell had watched the whole thing. So had Godet. "I'd like a citation number for the stop on the record," Darnell said. "And I'd like you to note in your report that I'm cooperating voluntarily." Thibault's jaw moved. "Open the lockbox. Do you have a warrant?" "I have reasonable grounds, based on a dog that didn't alert." The wind moved through the spruce trees along the shoulder. Somewhere behind the tree line, a transport truck rumbled past on the westbound lanes, its lights washing briefly through the dark, and then it was gone. Godet spoke for the first time in 40 minutes. "Thibault." Just the name, nothing else. But Thibault heard something in it because he turned, and the two of them looked at each other for a moment. That had a shape to it, the shape of something unspoken, the shape of a younger man deciding whether tonight was the night. It wasn't. Godet looked away. Thibault turned back. "Open it," he said, "or we're towing the vehicle and doing this at the detachment." Darnell stood very still. He thought about the birthday cake in its box on the back seat. He thought about his niece, Amara, who had asked specifically for chocolate with the buttercream flowers, not the fondant kind. He thought about his sister calling him at 9 that morning to make sure he was still coming, her voice doing that thing it did when she was trying not to sound like she needed something. "All right," he said. "I'll open it." He had loaded that truck in Halifax at 5 in the morning in the dark, with the kind of careful deliberateness that had become a habit so ingrained, it didn't feel like a habit anymore. It just felt like how he did things. The lockbox went in last, slid into the wheel well under the cargo mat, its combination set to a 4-digit number that was his mother's birth year. He always used that number. He couldn't have explained why. The box had been with him for 6 years. He'd carried it across 3 provinces, through 2 job changes and 1 apartment flood, and a bad year he didn't talk about much. It wasn't large, about the size of a hardcover novel, maybe a little deeper, black steel with a brushed finish. He had bought it the week he got home from his last deployment, because he needed somewhere to put the things that mattered, and didn't want to think too hard about why they needed protecting. Inside was a small envelope of documents. Inside was a photograph of 4 men in kit, squinting against desert light, 2 of whom were still alive. Inside was a folded letter on Department of National Defense letterhead, signed by a name that meant something if you knew what to look for. and sitting on top of everything in its hinged presentation case, lined in dark blue velvet, was the Star of Military Valor, Canada's second highest military decoration, awarded for valor in the presence of the enemy. The citation described an action in Kandahar province in the autumn of 2013, in which a master corporal attached to Joint Task Force 2 had, under direct fire, extracted 2 wounded soldiers from a disabled vehicle and provided covering fire long enough for a medevac to land. 3 men were alive because of what he did that day. One of them had since made lieutenant colonel. One of them sent Darnell a Christmas card every year, without fail, handwritten, 2 paragraphs, always ending the same way. I think about that road every single day. Darnell had left the forces in 2019. Honorable release. No fanfare, no ceremony beyond what the unit provided, which was a handshake and a coffee at the mess. He had gone back to Halifax, taken a contract position with a federal infrastructure firm, and built a life that was quiet in the ways he had always wanted it to be quiet. He drove the speed limit. He paid his taxes. He called his sister on Sundays. He was not a man who talked about what he'd done. He was not a man who wore it on his sleeve, literally or otherwise. The box stayed in the truck because it went everywhere with him. Because some things you didn't leave behind. And because he had never once in 5 years of civilian life thought he would need to explain it to a stranger on the side of a highway. He lifted the cargo mat. He entered the combination. He felt the bow standing behind him and slightly to the left, close enough that Darnell could hear him breathing, the small sounds of a man who was certain he was about to be right. The lockbox opened. Darnell stepped back. The bow moved forward and looked inside. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. The silence before had been the ordinary silence of a late October night in northern Ontario. Wind, darkness, the distant sound of the highway. This silence had a texture. It had a temperature. Godet had walked forward without realizing it, drawn by some instinct, and was now standing 3 feet to Thibault's right. He looked into the lockbox. He looked at the presentation case. He looked at the letterhead visible through the half-open envelope. He stepped back and put his hand over his mouth. Thibault had not moved. He was looking at the Star of Military Valor the way you look at something that reorganizes the room around it. The way you look at a thing that says, without words, everything you assumed was wrong, and there are witnesses. That's a military decoration, Darnell said quietly. Star of Military Valor. You can call the Directorate of Honors and Recognition at National Defense Headquarters if you'd like to verify. The letter is from the Chief of the Defense Staff. The photograph is personal. Thibault said nothing. The year on the citation is 2013, Darnell continued. Kandahar. I was a master corporal with JTF-2. I've been out since 2019. I live in Halifax. I'm driving to Sault Ste. Marie for my niece's birthday. The cake is on the back seat. I've been cooperative. I have not raised my voice. He paused, and I signaled for that lane change. Godet made a sound that might have been a cough and might not have been. He walked back to the cruiser. He opened the passenger door and sat down and closed it, and through the windshield Darnell could see him staring straight ahead at nothing. Thibault finally moved. He stepped back from the tailgate. He looked at Darnell once, and whatever he was looking for, whatever answer he was hoping the night would give him, it wasn't there. He reached up and closed the tailgate himself. "You're free to go," he said. His voice had changed, not remorseful. It wasn't that. It was the voice of a man who has just discovered that the thing he was holding is much heavier than he thought, and who is not yet ready to put it down in a way that anyone can see. He walked back to the cruiser without saying anything else. What happened next did not happen that night. Godet filed a supplementary report the following morning. It was 18 lines. It described the stop, the search, and the absence of any reasonable grounds for the canine deployment. It described Darnell's behavior as cooperative, respectful, and consistent throughout. It noted that the indication logged in Thibault's initial report did not align with what Godet had personally observed. He filed it to his sergeant. His sergeant read it twice and forwarded it to the detachment commander. The detachment commander called professional standards. The dashcam had been recording. It showed the stop from beginning to end. The lane change, complete with the signal, clearly visible. The search of the duffel bag, the exchange about the lockbox. It showed the beau's face when he looked inside. It showed Darnell standing in the cold in his jacket, calm and still as water. It showed everything. Professional Standards opened a file on Constable Thibault the following week. It was not his first file. There had been 2 previous complaints, both from black motorists, both unresolved. The new complaint, combined with Goddard's supplementary report and the dashcam footage, changed the weight of what had been accumulating. An investigation was launched. Thibault was placed on administrative duties pending its outcome. Darnell did not file the complaint himself, though he was contacted and gave a full statement. He did it carefully, the same way he did most things, completely, honestly, without embellishment. He described the stop. He described the search. He described the moment Thibault looked into the box and went quiet. He was asked by the investigator how he felt during the stop. He thought about it for a moment. "I felt like I'd been through things a lot worse than that," he said, "and I knew it was going to end, and I knew I wasn't going to be what he needed me to be." The investigator wrote that down. The birthday party was a success. Amara had worn a crown made out of cardstock and aluminum foil. The buttercream flowers were perfect. Darnell had let her eat 2 pieces, and her mother had given him a look and then laughed and let it go. He'd driven back to Halifax 3 days later, the same stretch of Trans-Canada. Same hour, roughly. He'd passed the spot where Thibault had pulled him over. He knew it by the spacing of the spruce trees along the shoulder, and he'd driven past it without stopping, both hands on the wheel. The signal on for every lane change. His sister called him the Sunday after he got home. "I heard what happened," she said. "Word travels. Kofi told me. He works with a guy who heard about the complaint. It's being handled." "It's being handled," he said again gently. "It's okay." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I keep thinking? I keep thinking you could have just not opened it. You could have let him tow the truck. You didn't have to show him anything." "No," he said. "I didn't. I did." Another silence. "Why?" He looked out the window of his apartment. The harbor was gray that day, flat and wide, the kind of November gray that wasn't bleak so much as honest. He'd always liked Halifax in November. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. "Because I wanted it on record," he said, "not for him, for Goddard, for whoever else was going to read that report. I wanted there to be a version of that night that was accurate." He paused. "There's a lot of versions of that night that could have been written. I wanted to make sure one of the real ones made it through." Thibault resigned in February before the investigation concluded. The RCMP Professional Standards Directorate confirmed the file remained open and that the resignation did not close the matter. A statement from the detachment expressed its commitment to equitable and professional conduct. It was 6 sentences. It did not mention Darnell by name. Goddard was transferred to a different detachment. He'd requested it. People who knew him said he was a different officer after that night. Not in a dramatic way. Not in any way you could point to easily. Just quieter about certain things. More careful. Less willing to stand by the cruiser in silence while something wrong happened in front of him. Some lessons cost the people who received them almost nothing. Some cost them years. The difference, usually, is whether someone was willing to open a box.